everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. It's your boy Shifty coming at you with another one. Today I am going to give my definitive breakdown of the dilemma the 49ers now find themselves in with regards to Jimmy Garoppolo. Now I do want to preface by saying, before we get into the video, that look, I'm a big fan of Garoppolo and I have the utmost respect for him as a player, as a person, as a professional. How he's conducted himself is, just pure class. Hasn't taken to social media or taking shots, at anyone. So I do ultimately wish him the best of luck, of course, wherever he goes in the future, except when he plays the 49ers. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. It is March 22nd of 2022, and Jimmy Garoppolo is still a member of the San Francisco 49ers. Who would have thought that? I certainly didn't, but look, kudos to anyone who had predicted that. Now, with Garoppolo still being on the roster, I think there are a number of reasons for that, and let me get into those reasons right about now. The first reason why I believe that Jimmy Garoppolo is still a 49er is the fact that he did have shoulder surgery in the offseason. Now, by all accounts and from all reports, it seems like that surgery went very well. He should make a full recovery, but he's not really going to be able to throw the ball much, if at all, for the next 3 or 4 months-ish. So that would leave a timeline you're looking at late June, July, training camp time before he can really start throwing the ball again. So I think that really has scared off a number of teams, and rightfully so. Although he is supposed to make a full recovery and be ready to play in time for the regular season and for the preseason games, it still is not an ideal scenario for the team that could potentially trade for him. Although there's no obligation, you kind of expect quarterbacks, especially if they're going to a new team, would like to meet up with their new teammates, their new receivers, tight ends, running backs, and what have you, and get some reps in just on their own accord. So that's not going to be able to happen with Garoppolo wherever he goes, simply because he's recovering from the surgery. So I think that is a big reason why teams are scared off from Jimmy Garoppolo compared to Carson Wentz, who got traded to the Washington Commanders, compared to Matt Ryan, who got traded to the Indianapolis Colts. Both places were places that were possible destinations for Garoppolo, but they probably feel more comfortable getting those quarterbacks right then and now. You can start basically practicing with their new teammates. Jimmy can't do that. The other thing that I think has probably been even more of a factor is the fact that this offseason, we've seen just an unprecedented amount of quarterback movement. Beforehand, who would have thought all of this would happen? If you asked me 6 weeks ago, even a month ago, that all of this would have gone down, I probably would have called you a little bit crazy. So Brady retires and comes back. So that's Tampa Bay sorted. So Denver trades for Russell Wilson. Indianapolis trades for Matt Ryan. Washington trades for Carson Wentz. Then we have the Browns. They trade for Deshaun Watson. Green Bay manages to hold on to Aaron Rodgers, so good for them. But there's been just a lot of quarterback movement, teams clearly moving on and moving in different directions. If you look at a team like the Falcons, clearly they were ready to move on from Matt Ryan. I think 2022 is going to be basically a throwaway year for that franchise. They brought in Marcus Mariota. They're going to hit a huge cap hit for the dead money in Matt Ryan's contract, and they're going to look to the future. The Falcons are very much a team in play for drafting a quarterback early, but there's just so much different movement. When you look at the teams who could still potentially trade for a Jimmy Garoppolo, I think you have 2 realistic ones and then one other possibility. So the 2 realistic ones are going to be the Texans and you have the Panthers. Both of those teams are selecting in the top 10, and although this isn't the most highly decorated quarterback draft class or projected quarterback draft class, Both of those guys could easily go in the top 10. What's to stop let's say the Houston Texans at number 3 overall, I believe they're selecting, is it 2 or 3? 3. They could easily select maybe a Malik Willis, who they want to develop behind Davis Mills for a year or two, and then they let Malik Willis come in. They'll probably only have Lovie Smith for a year or two, and then they unleash Malik Willis maybe in 2023. Or maybe they go with Kenny Pickett. Either way. You could also look at the Carolina Panthers, who were selecting 6th overall, and maybe whichever quarterback Houston doesn't go with, they take the other guy. So both of those teams could very, very realistically fill their quarterback need in the draft in the first round, and they'll get guys for 5 years on a cheaper deal than Garoppolo, without the injury history of Garoppolo, and with a lot more potential than Jimmy Garoppolo. So those teams could easily be ruled out by the time of the end of the first round in the NFL draft. The other team that is somewhat possible that could go for Garoppolo are the Seattle Seahawks. Now, it's so rare that you ever see quarterbacks being traded within the division. I really think the odds of this happening are basically slim to none. Although if Seattle, for whatever reason, and we know that they kind of love those former 49er players, but would they like Garoppolo? I think considering it's within the division, we would ask for a king's ransom, probably that number 9 overall pick that they just got from Denver, trading away Russell Wilson. And I think if we asked for that, Seattle would probably just hang up the phone and laugh. So I just don't see, the whole offseason really has not worked out well at all for the 49ers, for the front office. All the quarterback movement, Jimmy Garoppolo electing to get the surgery, which basically puts him out of action for a number of months, really hasn't played well for the 49ers. But we can talk about some of the solutions potentially moving forward, and we'll talk about that in the next segment coming right up here. Now I want to talk about some of the different possibilities with regards to an outcome to the Jimmy Garoppolo dilemma that we are in. So the first thing is there any possibility that we bring back Jimmy Garoppolo for the 2022 season and basically just keep him around? I think it's very unlikely that happens, especially at his current contract. Making $25 million to essentially be Trey Lance's backup, I think is incredibly unlikely, probably at less than a 1% chance I would put it at. Now, is it possible that maybe we essentially restructure Jimmy Garoppolo and say, look, if you want to stay, with a competitive team, with, an area that you're familiar with the coaching staff you're familiar with teammates that you're familiar with, you need to take a significant pay cut. And that is potentially possible simply because if we were to cut Garoppolo, he would not make anything near what he is scheduled to make in the open market, especially when you consider the now lackluster market for a quarterback out there in free agency, especially when you also have a guy like Baker Mayfield who is available as well. So I think, if Garoppolo were brought back at a much, much cheaper deal, that's a little bit more likely than being brought back at his current contract. But I still think the whole situation would be very, very unlikely. I just can't imagine it. It would be really bad optics considering how much was traded for Trey Lance to get him to obviously be the future of the franchise. However, the one positive that would come from it, if we did bring back Garoppolo, is the fact that, and I think people and fans I'd like to give, the majority of fans are a lot more smart about things with regards to like dynamics in terms of the locker room and whatever, so that I think everyone has resigned the fact that we are moving on to Trey Lance. He is the starter going into next season, and that Jimmy Garoppolo would be a very, very good backup quarterback to have, considering his experience in the offense and the success he's had playing with the team in terms of wins and losses especially. So he'd be a great backup option. Now, Trey Lance, and one of the things that I was not a huge fan of when I saw his tape in college is that he gets hit a lot. He does not really know when to slide at the right time, doesn't know really when to avoid the big hits, and in the 2.5 or so games that he played last season, he took a lot of hits. So maybe if they brought Garoppolo back at a significantly reduced cost, they could see the value in having Garoppolo there in case Trey Lance takes some of those hits and has to miss some time. So in the unlikely event that Garoppolo does come back in 2022, yes, from an optic standpoint and from, and it could be very odd, dynamics in the locker room on maybe some players might prefer Jimmy or Trey or whatever. But, there would be some positives if he came back should Trey Lance get hurt. And the style of football that Trey has played so far in his rookie year and in college, that is a pretty good likelihood that he could miss some games in a season. So beyond that, let's look at some of the other possible outcomes where Garoppolo is not with the team in 2022, and that's going to be coming up right now. So let's talk now about some of the outcomes where Jimmy Garoppolo is not on the team in 2022. Well, the first thing that we could do is we could just straight up cut him. Now, if we were to cut him today, we would actually be on the hook for, I believe it's $7.5 million because he's injured and had surgery and he's not able to play right now. We would be cutting him and he would get his injury settlement. So that would put us on the hook for quite a bit of money. Ideally, we wouldn't want that. We'd like to, if we're going to no longer have Garoppolo on the team, we'd like to have that $25 million back so we could maybe make another move or two or look to extend or give, money to the deserving players who are going to be on the team for the future going forward, aka Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel. So cutting him right now is possible, but I don't think it's the most likely situation. I think if the Niners were to cut Jimmy Garoppolo, it would be a number of months down the road where essentially Jimmy Garoppolo could pass a physical, so we are not on the hook for any money. We would basically get that $25 million back. Of course, by cutting him, if he signs with another team, we would not get anything with regards to compensatory picks. And of course, if we're not trading him, we would get nothing in return. Although for, let's say, doing Jimmy a solid, it would allow him to choose wherever he'd like to go. And for him, it might be a likely situation where, let's say there's a team that maybe didn't fulfill their quarterback spot like they would have preferred in the draft, that he could be an ideal plan B or plan C for another team. Now, in a perfect world, we could still trade Jimmy Garoppolo. I kind of mentioned a couple of teams earlier, Carolina and Houston. Now, if you look especially at Carolina, here's the tricky thing, is they actually don't have a second, third, or fourth round pick in this coming draft. I think they maybe have a compensatory pick in the fourth round, but that's it. So they don't have much draft capital right now, which is what I think Lynch and co are looking for. But they could look to trade a 2023 pick for Garoppolo, maybe like a third that could turn into a second, something like that. If we look at the Carolina Panthers, Matt Rule has not had the most success so far with the team, and his job and maybe the general manager's job could be, maybe that seat's getting a little bit warm. So I could very possibly see that they look to add a guy like Garoppolo, who, if anything else, what we've seen from him as 49er fans is that he wins games and he gets the best out of the players in the locker room, that they play hard for him. So they could maybe see, Matt Rule could maybe see, so we have Sam Darnold, and I think he's pretty much a dud. So maybe we bring in a stud like Garoppolo who can win us some games. Matt Rule gets to keep his job, and maybe for another year or so, and then they can maybe draft a quarterback still young. So, and that gives them maybe a little bit more leeway in terms of job security. I don't know how likely that's going to happen. I think in a perfect world for the 49ers is at this point. Now, in a perfect world, we would have got all those picks that Denver gave to Seattle for Jimmy, but at this point, moving forward, in a perfect scenario, I think what the 49ers are maybe looking for or hoping for is, let's just say, a similar situation that happened in terms of when the Patriots traded Jacoby Brissett to the Colts, and they actually got a first-round pick, which is pretty wild to think. But what I'm thinking of is maybe in training camp, maybe in preseason, that a quarterback for another team, a starting quarterback, goes down hurt, and at that point, Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy again. He can throw the ball, and a team, let's say, especially if it's a team who feels like they're in contention to win now, maybe they get a little bit desperate and they go, well, look, this guy is a proven winner, if anything, so let's trade for Garoppolo, and maybe that team is desperate, and they give up maybe a second or a first or whatever round pick to get Garoppolo, knowing that he could maybe take that team to the playoffs and maybe a deep playoff run. So I think that's really at this point maybe what Kyle, John Lynch, and the front office are hoping for, just because I just can't imagine at this point that any team is going to take a risk on Garoppolo not being able to throw, not being able to start building that chemistry with the new teammates. Plus, a lot of these teams are now probably focused on the draft, or Baker Mayfield. But let's say if they're focused on the draft, you have a number of guys there. Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, Sam Howell, Matt Corral, Desmond Ridder. There's a lot of guys out there, and I think the teams will probably look to go that route as opposed to Jimmy. But let's say, and I think maybe this is wishful thinking, but I think the 49ers are really going to hold out hope that, not that anyone wishes for players to get hurt, but that maybe a situation, everything's kind of gone against them so far in this offseason with everything that's transpired. So maybe they think, oh, we're due for a bounce back where the luck comes our way. And maybe a team, let's just say a team like imagine if it was like the Chiefs, or imagine if it was like the Raiders, or there's a team maybe that has some decent cap space that they feel like they're very competitive. Their starting quarterback goes down. They get desperate because they want to compete this year, and they look to trade for Garoppolo. We don't know what the likelihood of that happening is. I mean, players do get hurt all the time, but, with how the rules are in the NFL and in training camp, quarterbacks are basically not even touched. So it's wishful thinking, I believe, on the part of Lynch, if that's what they're hoping for. My guess is ultimately what happens, though. So where do I stand on all of this, or what do I think is the most likely scenario? Well, ultimately, I think Garoppolo I've been wrong all offseason, so take this for what it's worth. But ultimately, I believe that Garoppolo probably gets cut sometime in the summer. Once he can pass a physical, so we are not on the hook for any money. I believe that if we do want to make some more free agent signings, we'll restructure a couple of contracts, we'll extend a couple of players, and that can free up some more money. So we're not going to be prohibited from making some moves. But overall, I really don't see any situation that Garoppolo is on the roster come September of 2022, week 1. So, that is my whole summary of the Jimmy Garoppolo situation. I definitely have ranted on for quite a bit, rambled on for quite a bit. I've tried to keep it somewhat cohesive, but let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you think that I'm crazy or if there's something that I blatantly missed. And of course, I'd love to hear your comments, your feedback, and let me know what you guys think is gonna happen with Jimmy Garoppolo. This is for the 49ers. This is a huge story. I mean, like most Niner fans, I'm checking Twitter all the time and waiting for updates, what could happen. But it seems like we're going to be waiting for quite a long time. But let me know what you guys think, and more videos coming up, of course. I'm going to start hitting those draft videos as we are about a month or so away from the draft, which I can't wait for. And my goal is that I'll be able to stream the entire 3 days of the draft and react as the picks come in, and of course interact with everyone. But I'm going to leave it right there. And guys, I'm going to say 2 things. The butt counts, and I'll catch y'all on the flip side.